Hello and welcome to Motor Week, and this week I'm going to be testing the BMW M5, undisputably the benchmark of the super saloon class, and against it I'll be trying its Aussie counterpart, the Holden HRV GTS R, undeniably very macho, complete with 5.7 litre V8. Later on in the programme, Ian Royle gets to grips with the Porsche 968, his used car bargain of the week. First of all then, down to business with those super saloons. Two different cars now, taking two very different routes to the same destination. And that destination is to be a car that's pretty much everything to everybody. It's got to be supercar fast. It's got to have room on board for 4 adults. And I do mean room, not all screwed up in the back. And their luggage. And it's got to look good. In other words, it's got to be a super saloon. And this, the BMW M5, is the benchmark super saloon, even an ultra saloon. It is big, it is handsome. It's built by BMW, so it shouldn't break. And under here, there is a colossally powerful 4-litre V8 engine. It pushes out 400 brake horsepower, and it boasts more valves per cylinder and camshafts than you could shake a laptop computer at. And so, by way of complete contrast, still trying to do the same thing, from Australia, this, the Holden HRV GTS R. It's a big, flamboyant car. If you think it looks a bit like a Vauxhall Omega, that's because, well, it is a bit like a Vauxhall Omega. Quite a lot of it is based on that car. But somehow they've squeezed up front a 5.7 litre V8 engine, usually to be found at the pointy end of a Corvette. Here it's mated to a 6-speed gearbox, but that's as sophisticated as it gets, because this is all about brute force. For instance, just 2 valves per cylinder, nothing like the M5. So, before we get to grips with this, let's check out the benchmark. Oh goody, we're driving big fast cars. From the moment you fire it up, you're aware of that V8. It's not exactly raucous, it's a very refined and sophisticated version of the usual V8 burble, and it is deeply sinister, a reminder of what you're driving. Not that you need many reminders of what you're driving, it is colossally powerful, but it's the way it delivers that power that is so engaging. At low revs and when you're just cruising and being gentle, it is creamy smooth. Start to press on, and boy, every single movement of your right foot has an immediate effect in terms of bringing the horizon closer. It's simply a machine that is designed to get from one place to another very, very quickly. And if as you're cruising along it's not going quick enough, then there is the sport mode. I press a button, thus. And I'm not rewarded with just a few subtle little changes. Oh no, it's the equivalent of pressing the button on the Batmobile that puts the wings out and the missile shields over the windows. It's unbelievable. It lowers the car and its suspension. It remaps the engine for sports performance. It even weights up the steering so it feels more like a supercar to drive. It's an astounding piece of kit. Not wishing to be stereotypical about it, but it is a very typically German engineering solution to the issue of making a big, fast car. It goes extremely quickly, but it doesn't make a song and dance about it. It simply gets you to the next place more quickly than you would doing probably anything else, which is very different to the Australian take on the same problem. Now, it might be vulgar to talk about figures in such a refined company, but blimey, have a look at these. 0 to 60 in the M5 comes up in 4.7 seconds, and it goes steaming on to 100 miles an hour in 10.6. All of which would be brilliant if it weren't for just one thing. It's as though BMW tantalizingly give you a glimpse of all this performance and then say, no, you cannot use it. Because the traction control is ridiculous. It's nearly as powerful as the engine. And I don't mean that it's just a bit of a pain, you can't go as quick as you want to go. What I mean is, if you're pulling out from a junction in a bit of a hurry, and perhaps there's a lorry coming the other way, if the BMW M5 decides, nope, you're using too much power, chum, that's it. It cuts the lot. It leaves you dead in the water. It's a nanny state. Now this sounds much more like the kind of V8 we might be used to. It is an enormous noise, and you can't help but blipping with the right foot at every available opportunity. But despite the noise and the extra capacity, 5.7 litres over the M5's 4 litres, it ain't as quick. No sirree. Not by a massive amount. 0 to 60 is in what? 4.9 seconds. 0 to 100 dash is in 12 and a bit seconds, so it's only a second or two here and there, but on paper it makes a difference. As a drive, you do notice that it just doesn't feel as quick. Mind you, whereas the M5 almost hides its power, and particularly with that rather overbearing traction control takes it away from you, the Holden glories in it. The traction control, what there is located behind this little flap where incredibly you can turn it up or down depending upon just how leery you feel. Occasionally its rather less than salubrious roots do shine through, such as the interior. I think it's Le Boudoir de Tarte is the style adopted, rather nasty bits of plastic that don't always fit together particularly well. The steering though is great, it feels just weighted up enough, and the driving position not too bad. Just because I've said it is a little bit raucous and a bit grunty and it takes a more low-tech approach than the BMW, might lead you to think, well, it's a bit of a brute to drive. But it's not. In actual fact, the whole thing adds up to a surprisingly sophisticated car. It feels very well screwed down. There's huge amounts of grip. Both of these cars will set you back around £50,000 on the road, but start to add on the bells and whistles, and particularly in the case of the BMW, you can expect to pay the thick end of £60,000. So, both of our cars arrive at their supercar destination by their different routes. Ultimately though, if you and 3 other people need to get from one place to another by road as quickly as possible, it's the M5 that's always going to be your fastest mode of transport. The Holden though is at least a little bit more flamboyant. There's more of a sensation of speed, and that for me is what it's about. After all, to use either of these vehicles to the limit of their capabilities means you'll be breaking a lot of laws several times over. And that brings me to the final point, which is if it's illegal to use the things anyway, and if I was spending the best part of £65,000 on a car that boasted supercar performance, I'd want it to look like it could do 200 miles an hour even when it was parked. So why not leave the supercar performance to the supercars and the saloon car characteristics to the saloon cars?
Now, those of us who really love our cars have probably always at some stage wanted to own a Porsche, but you don't have to spend 40, 50, 60,000 pounds or even more to have one. A 968 Sport like this could be on your driveway for less than 20,000 pounds. The 968 was the replacement for the much-loved 944, which was produced for 10 years until 1992 when the 968 came along. First impression is everything on a car like this. If it looks tatty and not well cared for, walk away. If it has been well cared for, well, it should give you thousands and thousands of miles of trouble-free motoring. Plus, under here you get, well, practically a bulletproof engine. 3-litre, 4-cylinder, producing 240 brake horsepower. And I always think on a car like this, get it checked over by an expert who'll go over it with a fine-tooth comb. After that, all you have to do is choose a model. You can have the stripped-out race-derived Club Sport, the Coupe, the Cabriolet, or this, the Sport. This is a 94 M-Reg, it's done 80-odd thousand miles, and it would cost about £19,500. It hasn't got a full main dealer service history, but it has got a raft of bills and paperwork with it to show that it's been cared for. Fancy a 968? Well, this is our guide to what to pay. At a main dealer, a 968 Sport with 50,000 miles would cost £25,000. Again, at a Porsche dealership, an L-Reg 968 Club Sport with 54,000 miles comes in at £19,000. In the private ads, we've seen a 94 Sport with 57,000 miles on offer at £17,000, or a cabriolet on a K-plate for £17,500. There are cheaper cars about for less money, but they'll be in a poor condition or with huge mileages on. Out on the road, the 968 is an absolute delight to drive with near perfect weight balance, rear-wheel drive, a slick 6-speed gearbox and a top speed of 160 miles an hour, plus 0 to 60 in just over 6 seconds. Now, because of the relatively short lifespan of the 968, there are not too many of these cars about, and there's certainly a rare sight on our roads. The cabin is comfortable, but it's strictly a 2+2, kids only in the back. Okay, I have to admit this is not a particularly cheap car. Running costs are particularly high. Insurance Group 20 you're talking about for this 968. But it looks good and it drives even better. So this week my used car tip is the Porsche 968. Next week I'll show you how you can buy the classic Porsche, the 911 SC, for around 12 grand.
If the BMW M5 is the king of the super saloons, this is king of, I don't know, the bread vans maybe. Actually, that's a bit unfair. It's the M Coupe. It's basically a Z3 with a lid on it. There's room for 2 people and more than enough luggage for a weekend away. Over 320 bhp through the rear wheels, with nothing so boring and wimpy as traction control to spoil the fun. It is unlike anything else, and it's a car we'll be looking at in greater depth on the programme any week in the future. We hope to see you the other side of the break.
What's that saying? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, I'm here in France, so I thought I'd do a spot of wine tasting. Now, let's imagine for a moment that these wines are all makes of car. What have I got here? BMW, sporty, fruity, bags of flavour. Just going to try a little bit. And loads of punch right to the last. Oh, Mercedes, you can never fault the impeccable quality of a Mercedes wine. It's smooth. It's a wine that's going to taste this good in 5 years as it does today. And what have we got here? A Beaujolais Nouveau. It's the new Audi A4. Now, in the past, Audi have been a little dull, but reliable. But it says here on the label that, it says it's got all of what the other wines have got and a little extra je ne sais quoi. Well, shall we see if it does what it says? Let's take it for a little gargle. The Audi A4 was launched 6 years ago. It had a facelift 2 years ago, and since then, well, nothing until this. And I must say, first impressions are, well, it's pretty well-rounded. I love the way it's reminiscent of the TT with a well-curved windscreen and tapered front end. Then it mimics the older A6 at the back with the rounded rump and the rear pillars. But hang on a minute, it's not all about looks, is it? You've got to taste it to get full appreciation of the quality. The new Audi A4 comes with a choice of 2-litre and 3-litre petrol engines, where in the 3-litre manual. And I tell you what, it's fast and it's very, very smooth. In fact, maybe a little bit too smooth. I prefer something with a little bit more kick in the flavour. But I reckon that Audi are going to take on BMW head on, as they're planning to introduce a sporty coupe, an Avant, which is an estate to you and me, and eventually a cabriolet, which will be lovely for those balmy summer evenings when you want something fresh, fruity and funky and a little bit different. All models are based on the new VW platform, so you might see the next generation Passat and a new upmarket Skoda driving around, looking distinctly similar to this in the not too distant future. High up on the list of priorities in the Audi A4 makeover is the chassis, which has been redesigned and strengthened. Also redesigned is the rear suspension, which is now very similar to that of the Audi A8. In fact, Audi are claiming that the handling is now on a par with the rear-wheel driven Mercedes C-Class and BMW 3 Series. The car feels very safe and sturdy on the roads, very well grounded. But then it is quite nippy as well, sporty and full of flavour. And when you're going around the corners, it's sharp and precise. Well-rounded vintage all in all. They've got a lot of bottle of Audi, as they've introduced as standard across the range air conditioning, side curtain airbags and satellite navigation. And there's loads more room. It's slightly higher, wider and longer, which means an extra 41mm of legroom for our friends in the back. And Audi say that the price of its new A4 will undercut the existing model, which is great news for us consumers. Oh, très bien. You know, I've really enjoyed coming to France and sampling a few of the finer things in life, test driving this lovely new Audi A4, and when it's safely parked up for the night, indulging in a drop of Van Rosé. I could get quite used to this. I wonder if it did do what it said on the label. Yeah, it did actually. I'll drink to that. Here's the new Audi A4.
Volkswagen are trying to make Seat into the Alfa Romeo of the VW group, and that means giving the brand a bit of Latin flair. So, does the new Seat Leon match up to the Alfa 156 for sophisticated good looks? Well, unfortunately not, especially this 1.8 20-valve Cupra. Now, it gets sport suspension, a full body kit, alloy wheels, sport seats and a big exhaust on the back. If you thought that the hot hatchback was dead, well, think again. For the boy racers amongst us, this promises to be a bit of fun. Now, fun is what this car really is all about, and it's also extremely fast. You've got a 180 brake horsepower engine driving the front wheels only, and of course you get traction control too, and at times it certainly needs it. What you tend to find is as you accelerate away, the front nose sits up a bit, the front tyres start to scrabble for a bit of grip, and then you're away, and it's an engine that just wants to be revved and revved and revved right the way round to the red line. It's an awful lot of fun. I don't particularly like the brakes, they're a bit too squashy for me. The gear change is very slick and very smooth, and a very short throw to it as well. If you're wondering where the word Cupra comes from, by the way, well, Seat say it's an amalgam between the words cup and racing. So there's another word for the English language then. I'll tell you what, in my youth I had quite a few of what were dubbed at the time as the hot hatchbacks, XR2 and the like, but I don't remember those being as entertaining to drive as this new Cupra Sport with 180 brake horsepower. And I'm not quite sure how this car fits into the overall VW philosophy with all the different brands competing against one another. This car could take sales away from the Golf GTI, and it's also pretty competitively priced at under £18,000.
What price would you put on one extra gear, 32 brake horsepower and 8 miles an hour? Hard to say? Well, Porsche reckon that it's worth almost 8 grand. Because that's how much more you'll have to pay to swap your basic Boxster for this, the Boxster S. Now visually you wouldn't be able to tell the two cars apart. That's because all the changes to the Boxster S are under the skin. And those changes have transformed the Boxster from a great sports car into an absolutely superb one. The kind of car that makes sticking to the speed limits very difficult indeed. And it isn't just the engine that's been worked on. Porsche have made revisions to the suspension and the chassis. The shocks and springs are now much firmer, and the rear axle now has wheel mounts and guiding elements to help you get the most out of the car's performance. The Boxster's flat six now displaces 3.2 litres. And of course, with incredible performance like that, you need some pretty incredible brakes to go with it. And the Boxster S has got an all-new braking system based on the 911 Carreras. Still features ABS as standard, but the wheel discs are now larger and wider, and they've been cross-drilled so that you're guaranteed fantastic braking even in the worst conditions. Shall we? Shall we give it a try? Are you ready? Oh, lovely. I think we can safely say that they work just about fine. The S has got the extra gear that I mentioned earlier, and if you fancy it, then there's a Tiptronic option you can go for that lets you play at being a racing driver. It does, however, slightly reduce the performance, but as 0 to 60 only takes half a second more, I don't think you'll lose much sleep over it. Now, I know that talking about this car is beginning to make me sound like an infatuated teenager, so I've been trying to be practical and think about some of the bad points, and the best I can come up with is that the interior doesn't really feel like it belongs in a £42,000 car, and there aren't that many storage spaces in here for all your bits and pieces. What can I say? It's a great car! I've got to say, I really do love this car. If it was a man, I'd have it down the altar by now, kicking and screaming. It feels fantastic to drive. It's taut, it's firm, and even at high speeds, it feels incredibly solid and stable. Those massive 18-inch wheels aren't going anywhere other than the direction that you point them in. The steering is responsive, it's got bags of feedback, it's just an all-round blast to drive, and it's topped off by the sound that comes out of the exhaust. God, I could listen to that all day, it sounds amazing. So is this wolf in sheep's clothing worth it? Well, that depends on how much 1 extra gear, 32 brake horsepower and 8 miles an hour is worth to you. Would you splash out on the Boxster S, or would you buy the basic Boxster and still have enough spare change to buy a brand new Volkswagen Lupo as well?
Next week on the programme, we keep it speedy when I find out if a fast Mitsubishi at half the price of a Porsche 911 Carrera 4 really is any kind of competition. We'll see you then.